Good morning. My name's Terry Makings and I'm a Governor of the Shrine of Remembrance. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners upon which this monument is built and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Now this sanctuary, a most sacred place, looks beyond the grave. The message being that no person since the dawn of time who has served their country with sincerity has served in vain. It forbids us to forget our valiant dead. The oldest and the youngest of those who died did so that we, their countrymen, might live the life to the fullest. That is the message of the shrine, and may we be worthy of their sacrifice. Now it's my privilege to be the Master of Ceremonies for this service, to honour and remember our submariners. The opening address will be given by Commodore Greg York, Member of the Order of Australia, Conspicuous Service Cross, Senior Naval Officer Victoria. I invite the Commodore to the lectern.
Thank you, Terry. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we're here today, as Terry said, to remember the service and sacrifice of our submariner community. I intend to do that today by talking about our first two Australian submarines, HMAS AE1 and HMAS AE2. Before I start, I would like to pay my respects to those veterans and serving personnel and their families that are with us today. We should also remember the many defence personnel that are currently deployed away from their homes on this day. For Navy, that is some 2,000 personnel deployed on some 20 ships around the world and away from their home ports. It was in 1907 that the then Australian Prime Minister Alfred Deakin became convinced that the submarine was not only a potent weapon, but one that was also be suitable for Australia. It was not until early 1914 that his vision came to reality, when two submarines, HMAS AE1 and AE2, were delivered and commissioned in the United Kingdom. The Australian E-class submarines displaced some 810 tonnes when submerged and were capable of top speed of nearly 15 knots. The crews were a mix of Royal Navy and Royal Australian Navy personnel. Not surprisingly, their long journey from the United Kingdom to Australia took nearly 3 months, following a number of defects en route. They arrived in Sydney on the 24th of May 1914. The welcome to Australia was short-lived, with the outbreak of World War I only 3 months later. At the commencement of the war, AE1 and AE2 were assigned to the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force in New Guinea waters. On the morning of the 14th of September 1914, HMAS AE1, under the command of Lieutenant Thomas Besant, Royal Navy, sailed from Rabaul to patrol the St George's Strait between the islands of New Britain and New Ireland. She was in company with HMAS Parramatta, the River-class destroyer. By mid-afternoon, Parramatta had lost sight of the submarine to the west of the Duke of York Island. Thinking that AE1 was on her way back into harbour, Parramatta continued her tasking. The destroyer returned to port later that night at around 2000, when AE1 was found to still have not returned into harbour. Concern was raised. A number of RAN ships and various local vessels from the area were later that evening dispatched to search for the missing submarine. Over the following days, the search for AE1 continued in the waters along the coastlines of New Ireland and New Britain, but no trace of the ill-fated AE1 was found. AE1 was the first submarine in the Royal Australian Navy and the RAN's first war loss, lost with all hands, 3 officers and 32 sailors, half Australian, half British and 1 New Zealander. The fate of the crew of AE1 remained unknown until she was found on the bottom on the 19th of December 2017, only a few short years ago, off the Duke of York Island. She was found by a research vessel, the MV Fugro Equator. Following the loss of AE-1 in 1914, and as World War I developed, HMAS AE-2, under the command of Lieutenant Commander Henry Stoker, RN, was offered to the British Admiralty. Subsequently, AE-2 departed Albury, Western Australia, on the 31st of December 1914 and accompanied the second Anzac convoy to the Mediterranean. When she arrived, she joined the Royal Navy squadron supporting the unfolding operations off Gallipoli. And it was during April 1915 that AE-2 was ordered to attempt the passage through the heavily fortified Dardanelles Strait with the intent to disrupt enemy shipping in the Sea of Marmora. All previous attempts by Allied submarines to pass through this strait had failed. Minefields, fixed and mobile gun batteries, searchlight surveillance and patrolling Turkish warships, coupled with natural navigational hazards, had made the Dardanelles seemingly impenetrable. It was on the 25th of April 1915, now known as Anzac Day, that AE-2 entered the straits on the surface at about 2:30 in the morning. Throughout the passage, searchlights continually swept the strait, but AE-2 avoided detection, continuing unmolested until about 4:30 a.m. when gun batteries opened fire from the northern shore. AE-2 immediately dived, beginning an underwater passage through the minefields. Twice, AE-2 surfaced in the minefield to make navigational observations, and at 6 a.m. she was within 2 miles of the Narrows at Chinook, with the sea flat and the weather calm. Forts on both sides of the Narrows sighted AE-2 and soon opened heavy fire. Following a period when AE-2 repeatedly tried to surface to carry out observations, only to be attacked by enemy vessels and shore-based artillery, she was forced once again to submerge. During this period, AE-2 grounded twice and suffered hull damage, which caused minor leaks. Finally, having eluded her pursuers, she entered the Sea of Marmora at 9 a.m. on the 26th of April 1915. On entering her patrol area, she fired several torpedoes at enemy vessels with no reported hits. On the 29th of April 1915, while off Burma Point, AE-2 made rendezvous with a Royal Navy submarine, HMS E-14. She was the second submarine to make a passage through the Dardanelles. The two submarine commanders met again the next day. AE-2 positioned for a rendezvous at 10 a.m. on the 30th of April 1915, but on her arrival, she was forced to dive to avoid an enemy torpedo boat. Shortly afterwards, AE-2 suddenly lost trim, breaking the surface, exposing her bow, and came under fire from the torpedo boat and another enemy vessel. Lieutenant Commander Stoker flooded the forward tanks and AE-2 dived steeply. Attempts to check the dive, however, caused the boat to break the surface once again, this time exposing her stern. The Turkish torpedo boat opened fire and AE-2 was holed in the engine room. With his submarine in an incapacitated state and having no other option, Stoker blew main ballasts and ordered all hands on deck and proceeded to scuttle the submarine. AE-2 sank in some 72 metres of water off Burma Point. Thus, AE-2's game of hide and seek had come to an end, and her commanding officer and the crew were on their way to spend 3.5 years in a Turkish prison camp. One officer and 3 sailors died while POWs, whilst Lieutenant Commander Stoker and the remainder of the crew were set free at the end of the war. While we gather here at this remembrance service, we remember those brave souls from HMAS AE1 and AE2 and all the subsequent men and women who have served in the submarine service since. May we be worthy of their service and of their sacrifices. Thank you.
Thank you, Commodore. Probably difficult for most of us to appreciate the extraordinary contribution those submariners made. And as the Commodore said, may we be worthy of their service and sacrifice. We've also got with us today the President of the Submariners Association, that's Keith Hatfield, and the Secretary, Ian Tanner. We have other veterans amongst us. You probably see by those that have medals, in particular Captain Ken Gregg, Medal in the Order of Australia, RAN retired, and Lieutenant Commander Barry Davis. Sorry, Barry. Barry always takes the mickey out of me, so I like to keep him on edge. At this point, I'd now like to invite Ian Tanner, the Secretary, who's going to recite the Submariner's Prayer.
O Father, hear our prayer to Thee, for your humble servants beneath the sea. In the depths of oceans as oft they stray, so far from night, so far from day. We would ask you, your guiding light to glow, to make their journey safe below. Please oft times grant them patient mind, then ere the darkness won't them blind. They seek thy protection from the deep, please grant them peace whene'er they sleep. Of their homes and loved ones far away, we ask you care for them each day, until they surface once again to drink the air and feel the rain. We ask your guiding hand to show a safe progression, sure and slow. Dear Lord, please hear our prayers to Thee, for your humble servants beneath the sea. Amen.
Thank you, Ian. I'd also like to mention that I have my colleague here, Lieutenant Commander Jan Gallagher, who is also a Governor of the Shrine. The catapult party will mount. The Remembrance Party will now lay wreaths. Commodore York, AM CSC RAN, Senior Naval Officer Victoria, will lay a wreath on behalf of the Royal Australian Navy. Lieutenant Commander Barry Davis will lay a wreath on behalf of the Submariners Association. Mr. Keith Hatfield and Ian Tanner will identify those members of the association who are no longer with us in memorial.
It has become the custom of this service to read out the names of our past members, some of whom served with distinction during World War II, and others who served also with distinction in the Royal Navy and the Royal Australian Navy and other allied navies, both in peace and war. Peter John Uglow, Dennis Dimmock, James Dancy, William Littlejohn, James Fryer, Bernard Hodgson, Reg Willing, Eric Hill, Jeff Jelly, James McTeer, Frank Johnson, John Tate, John Horlock, Angus Bartlett Brake, Brian Toogood, Joan Jones, Dave Edson, Charles Bonnet, Harry Holden Straw, Arthur Earle, Frank Nagel, Stan Connor, James Skelton, Richard Brooks, Keith McQuaid, James Burke, Joe Howarth.
Charlie Bradbury, Walter Murray Johns, Clive Taylor, Michael Norton, Dick Sear, Jerry France, Ross Cameron, Bob Appleton, Peter Scott Maxwell, Robert Sloan, George Leonard, Michael Clark, Louis Charles Pryor, Harry Lees, Harry Hughes, Arthur Cooling, George Vincent, Robert Nicholson, Bill Holyoke, Dacre Smith, Andres Bruhont, George England, Dwayne Hogue, Pat Heffernan, Don Didsbury, William Bill Bacon.
This blood-red poppy, the colour of the blood-stained battlefields of Europe, is our connection with past submariners and those that still serve. I invite anybody or everybody with a poppy to please come forward and place it in the urn next to the stone of remembrance. I would now ask that you please stand if you're able. I invite the President of the Submariners Association, Keith Hatfield, to recite the ode.
They shall not grow old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. lest we forget.
Please remain standing for the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free. We've golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is girt by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts, all beauty rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Catapult party will dismount. Please be seated. That concludes our service today. I'd like to thank the Catapult Party from HMAS Cerberus and, of course, musician Andrew Bryce. And if you've ever heard a better rendition of The Last Post in Ravelli, please let me know, because I don't think you've ever heard one better than that. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you all for being here today. We thank those on the webcast watching from home. May you have a good afternoon. Thank you.